Welcome to today's webinar, In Control of Your Dairy Farm. My name is Yvonne Osservoort and I'm Global Dairy's Operational Manager. And today I'm going to be your host again. Well, for some people who do not know yet how to use Zoom, I'm going to explain a little bit to you how the functionalities of a webinar work. So a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, this webinar will be recorded. That means within 24 hours, you will receive a link of this webinar so you can watch it again on demand. And I'm going to talk about, well, what I said about the functionalities of the webinar of Zoom. So that's raise hand, Q&A, polls, and panel. And what I like to do now straight away is see, and you can tell if I was lying or not, see how much the world is represented. So I'm just going to launch a poll. And see how many people are there. Okay. Ooh. No Asia yet. Yes, there it is. There it is. Wonderful. I'm just going to stop it and share the results. So not everyone has voted yet, so I'm sorry for those who didn't vote yet. But just to give you an idea of the people who are currently there already. Yeah, great. So let me quickly give you an idea of how the webinar functionalities work. At the bottom, you see 3 functionalities, and for this webinar, we only have raise hand and the Q&A enabled. So when you click on the hand, if someone asks you a question where you can answer yes or no, you just raise your hand by clicking on it. And if you have a question for today's presenter, Koert van Lenteren of Lely International, you can click on the Q&A box. Here it is. You can ask your question and either send it anonymously by ticking the box, push send, and we see your question. Only the presenters and the GDF team will see your questions today. After the presentation is finished and there are some questions that remain unanswered, Koert will have a look at those questions and you will receive a document with some answers afterwards. That's within a week approximately that you receive it. So today, our talk of today, we have the introduction of global dairy farmers who are not yet familiar with global dairy farmers. That's done by our president, Mr. Ad van Velde. He's a proud dairy farmer from the Netherlands. Then we have the main presentation from Koert van Lenteren. Then we have our panel discussion of 3 of you guys, of the attendees. You could, during the registration, you could already tick a box whether you want to be part of it. Well, just before we actually start the panel discussion, I will call out 3 names and we'll ask to turn the video on. And then we have the closure of today, and Ad will announce about our next webinar. But for now, enjoy our webinar, and I would like to give the word to our president, Mr. Ad van Velde. Oh, Ad, you have to turn on your volume, your microphone.
Yes. Okay now?
Yes.
From my side too, welcome to every participant to this 3rd Global Dairy Farmers webinar about to be in control on your dairy farm. My name is Ad van Velde, dairy farmer in the Netherlands and president of Global Dairy Farmers. For some of you who are not that familiar with Global Dairy Farmers, GDF is the only unique network globally of real practicing dairy farmers. We all have to make money with the production of milk every day. With all the online meetings we organized the last couple of months with GDF farmers and with GDF business partners, I realize what a great group GDF is, especially for me as a dairy farmer. We got a lot of positive feedback to our previous webinar. John de Jonge and Brandon Peterson of the Hydrogreen company gave us a good insight into possible new developments in feeding cows. In spite of COVID-19, we can be happy that there are still people and companies who are looking ahead. Next to Hydrogreen, Lely is also one of those companies that always looks ahead. Not only with regard to dairy farming, but also broadly with regard to what's happening in the world. Today we have a very practical subject. This subject is strongly linked to lean management and the lean approach. What are my connections with this subject? I have a green belt in lean management. It means for our farm that we work even more with protocols than before. But I think it's even more important that our employees have become more involved in the whole operation. What a simple whiteboard can realize. We have two GDF farmers, Matt and Jana Hocken, in New Zealand. Young, ambitious, and a fantastic couple. They are already GDF farmers for a couple of years. It's a marvelous example how they implement lean in a successful dairy farm down under. Jana wrote a book about lean management on a dairy farm titled The Lean Dairy Farm. With GDF, we visit the Al Rawabi dairy farm in Dubai a couple of years ago. If you enter the farm, a huge whiteboard welcomes you. On the board, Al Rawabi mention all kinds of topics like production costs per liter of milk, but also NH3 reduction they want to realize, and many, many other topics on that whiteboard. All linked to the lean approach they work with at Al Rawabi. It was very interesting to see. Our speaker today, Kurt van Lenteren. Kurt is head of Dairy Excel, part of Lely International. He's leading the Lely activities to embed automation solutions into the large segment globally. I'd like to give the word to Kurt. Thank you.
And share my screen. Yvonne, are we sharing or not yet? Good evening to the Europeans, good morning to Asia and New Zealand, and good afternoon to the US. Are you hearing me okay? Maybe Yvonne can give me a little signal. And I'm continuing. So first of all, thank you for Global Dairy Farmers for inviting Lely to also be part of their webinar series and having the opportunity to present what we do beyond, let's say, the technological part of the Lely Group. And today is about being in control of your dairy. And as Alt already introduced in his introduction speaking, once you start to explore the trajectory of how can I make my farm better, how can I improve on what we actually do on the dairy, you start a whole new learning career. And that's why I selected this starting picture, which is how can we stand out from the crowd? So this cow is sticking her head out and exploring new sites and new horizons. Going to the next. Yep. So today's subject, I will take you in three little rounds through how we communicate with our dairies as the Lely organization, also exploring lean technology and how we use lean within our large farming segment, how we look at our operations, but also in the end a bit pragmatic to say how can it work on your dairy, and that's also then the starting point of the discussion for the panel discussion, to have that open interaction with the group and with dairymen from all over the world, because there's never a moment that we should miss an opportunity to learn. So starting with challenges in dairy, and there are quite a few, and what I've done is I've taken the 5 challenges that were selected by the Lely large farming community last year. We have our large farming community united in a peer group that meets biannually, and we looked at several challenges that they listed for us if they would come together that they wish to discuss. And one is really standing out from all over the world. It's like, where do we find our next workforce? How do we recruit them properly, but also how do we onboard them properly? And foremost, how do we retain that workforce? Because we all know that management that runs like diapers is not there to stay. So we really need to be, let's say, targeting the right people. Another item was, especially with larger dairies, we produce a nice volume of milk, but can we valorize upon it? We see milk traveling, leaving the dairies, and we even need to put the check on the back because it is not being paid for. Then all around us, the whole world is getting more condensed. What's happening left is popping up right, but also legislation gets more severe. We need to deal with another ecosystem of dairy farming, and also the world is no longer connected in a first generation to dairy farming. So what we do and how we do it has another appeal and has another opinion. Especially then the manure kicks in, because it's a smelly business, although it's the smell of money. It's a different taste for consumers. So that links to the last bit, is like, how can we stay understood and also stay accepted? So we'll elaborate a bit further, and that is always the number one item that people mention to us is, okay, where do we find those people and how do we train them? So at some stage at Lely in, I think 2015, we realized we almost need to start with a level 0 farm management introduction course again to embrace new farmers, but embrace new farm workers to be successful, especially in emerging markets where the technology isn't known and when there is no history in dairy farming. So when everything is new, but they still want to stand out from the crowd, so how to do so? Another thing is that genetically we've grown our cows. Genetically, cows are capable to do a lot. Are we providing the circumstances that she can actually perform and that she is the leading lady amongst the dairy? Many of our assets are locked up in cows, so we do want them to perform. So how can we make sure that we get the most sellable milk out of this animal, but in an animal friendly manner? And that's one thing where we at Lely always look at, okay, can we definitely make sure that on our dairies our animal freedoms are secured as well? So making sure that she can really lay down and have the space and be herself. Another thing is the challenge of economics. Farm incomes get more volatile. The cost side actually of the business is less volatile than that income side, and that really puts a constraint on when to invest. Dairy farming by nature is a long-term exercise, but actually succession always is leading. But the investment cycles get shorter and shorter due to the fact that, okay, interest rates are lower, but still getting the money and convincing the bank with a 5-year planning, sometimes that's challenging. And that's why also in the introduction quotes that Global Dairy Farmers collected of me, it was like, who has a plan? Who has a 5-year plan? Because it helps you to get your bank allowances sorted and to move ahead in the industry. Another big challenge is like who's keeping an eye on us and who watches us from the outside. And it's not always negative. For example, Eyes on Animals, we've invited them when we had our large farming group together in the Netherlands, and we openly had a discussion with the crowd, what they felt, how we dealt with calves, how we dealt with calf raising, and also be honest about it, because we said there is a commercial aspect to it and we need to make sure that the next generation of animal comes in. So how can we make sure that what we do from a husbandry perspective is accepted? Because if we're accepted, we can also get understood. Otherwise, that will not happen. A new thing kicking in, Northwest Europe, that suddenly needs to start irrigating. Eastern Germany, for example, going for the third summer in a row where there is too little water to actually get proper crops and proper feed produced to come through the winter time. The Netherlands even irrigating as of early spring this year. So there is new climate changes happening, and it's maybe already closer by than we realize. Another thing is that we filled up the, let's say, the nice zones of climate for an animal already with cows, and we're now exploring into new territories which have an enormous delta in temperature and humidity to cope with throughout the year. We're fortunate with other partners of global dairy farming to bring proper housing to these cows, but it is something that we should all look into, like what is the next wave of how do we have the right climate for the cow, because it's getting warmer, it's getting drier, it's getting more humid. And then a new thing came in, and that was this year, like, oof, we're all in a new world. We're all learning, and these webinars are one aspect of it. We see more of them. We have more of those online sessions, but it also takes the charm away of the international travel, the connecting of cultures, etc. And on the other hand, it's farmers that never, let's say, bend over. We always stand up and then we take a change and, okay, what is it? And that's why I also mentioned in one of the earlier quotes that were shared prior to the session, have you checked every job that's on farm, which is a three-handed job? Because with social distancing, that's no longer a possible opportunity. And always in those three-handed jobs, that's where lies the impact of moving further. So I've added this challenge next to the other 5. The beauty of dairy is we will always overcome them, but they're there and they have an impact on how you see the next round going forward. And we have different discussions with our dairymen when we sit on the table right now. So that leads to the first poll that I wish to introduce, and Yvonne will organize and host. So what's been your biggest challenge in the last 12 months? Or what is the biggest challenge to deal with in the coming period? Okay, Yvonne, do we get the first answers in? Okay, so a definite top 2 and also matching with our customers. That's always good to know. Probably many of you are in this session as well. What I've done for the next part of this presentation is actually that we move on and never waste a good crisis for new opportunities. And that brings us closer to the topic of today, is how to be in control of your dairy. And as lately we've taken a lean journey as well. And by the end of the zeros, we realized that we weren't manufacturing in maybe the right sequence, in the right order, in the right methodology. We saw that we got a bit distant from our customers, that our network was performing well, but we lost a bit of sight, and we felt that we could do better. So our founder and founding family, the Van der Lely family, decided we need to take a new route, and we started with the lean journey, and started as well to explore what we could do with lean on farm. So starting from the factory, learning what it does in the boardroom, and through our different business segments, we also learned that why don't we take this to dairies? And actually that started also the introduction of how we approach as a Lely company our large farming segment. So it is a route of opportunities, because the moment you embrace into continuous improvement, you want to improve. And the most critical part is, do you sustain what you've changed and what you've improved? Because otherwise you slip back and you can roll backwards pretty quick. So it is also when you install new technology that there is a moment of change, and how could you really, let's say, utilize and really exploit on the change you wish to see on the dairy. So is it an effective new process that needs to be installed? Is it looking at your calf raising? Is it what kind of feed we produce to better serve the animals? Do we start with grazing again, which was a big subject here in Europe, as some countries went into, let's say, legislated grazing, or maybe grazing for an updated income. So lean works with 5 principles, and I will not go deep into them, but just highlight the key critical aspects. Value and waste I will show in the next slide. Waste works with several items that do not add value from a customer perspective. So there can either be overproduction, that could be movement of people, that could be over-processing, which is the famous packaging we get from Amazon.com with 25 blisters, and we have to unwrap it. That's the most appealing one that everybody understands. Defects, you get something which is broken. But one we embraced as Lely very much, it was the unused creativity, and to really learn and to understand, like, how can we move forward. Another thing is, what you start to do with lean is you produce in flow. So if you compare it to the early 1800s, when you had a steam engine for a single operation, so this one drills a hole, this one bends a piece of steel, and then hand over the boxes. Now with what you do with flow is you start something and you finish something. And that's what we do in our manufacturing as well. So a nice example is the Discovery, our manure scraper, where one person grabs a cart and actually, like building a box of Lego, finishes the product. But then what most important is, when you look for pull, you only build that product when the market needs it. And that's where we've learned that we can add a lot of flexibility and creativity at the back of a production process, with accessories, with tailoring robotics to the customer by installing pull. And then once you start, you pursue the route to perfection. So what is value? It is very simple. It is only something that a customer is willing to pay for. So a company can never determine value. It is always the person purchasing the equipment or purchasing the idea that says, okay, this is what it's for me valued at. What is waste? Basically anything that he doesn't want to pay for. And it is not so that you can create a completely lean process. There's always some parts in the process that might obstruct. Even the leanest companies, for example, Toyota, there's still around 20% of their activities is actually truly lean, because you need to have other parts in place to be successful. And then striving for perfection. So we all like to see this spot, maybe not when you're grazing herd in down under, but even in this picture, there's a little abnormality. So once you strive for perfection, you also want this tail to be in. Now I wish to learn from the group who's actually familiar with lean, who's using lean, or who is introduced to it but not actually practicing it. So thank you, Ian Wonder, for sharing the new poll, and we will invite a few people to comment on this one in the session to start a bit of interaction. Okay, nice to see that 1 out of 8 is using actually lean. Many of you have heard of it. Some say no, we're not applying, and 10%, what is it? So hopefully those 10% will know a little bit more after this webinar. Looking at our host for today, how do you want to run the questions?
So, hi. Yeah, well, the people, for instance, that have heard of it, there's a question about determining waste. Is that a typical lean term? And is that one of the most difficult parts so that it gives you focus?
Is that for me already, Yvonne?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so determining waste is actually step 2. What you start is, what is the value we're adding? So we're most of the time plotting the value streams of a complete dairy operation or just that particular location of a dairy group. And then we look at, okay, what is the main flow? If we have valorized that flow and identified it, then we are highlighting the wastes. And in the coming slides, I will give a little bit of insight what it is, because you need to learn to see. It is a skill. And for the people that are just starting with lean, I always have a little trick, and that is from a visual perspective. When you enter an area where you're new, do you understand in 5 seconds where you are and what's happening? If not, there's improvement potential.
Thank you. I think maybe that's also a nice question for our participants to raise their hand. If someone else is entering their farm, do they think this person gets it in these 5 seconds? Who says yes? Raise your hand if you think that person gets it in 5 seconds. So that's one. So that means there's a lot of improvement. So there's that's good news for if you want to implement lean, I guess.
Yeah, maybe it's also a signal for the industry that we should pay better attention to our dairy farmers that we visit all around the world.
Yes, definitely. Do you have another question, maybe, Kurt, for the participants?
What is their estimate of replacing an employee cost-wise?
You can, for the people who want to, they can put their answer in the question form in the Q&A. So could you repeat that question again, Kurt?
So my question is what would be the estimate of our dairy farmers present today of, I have a morning that the day starts, but my employee calls in that he says, I'm no longer working for you until the moment you're up and running again. What is the cost implied with it?
So for those dairy farmers, if you have an answer, you can put it in the Q&A box. I see some answers coming in. 3 times the annual salary. 2 to 3 months to be at 85%. $5,000 an employee. 50K. 1.5 times annual salary.
Yeah, so it's a huge spread, and I think a bit commenting on it, every dairyman knows it very well by himself. If it is a, let's say, replacement on a managerial level, you run into those 1.5 salaries. If it's a milker, on a 24/7 rotary parlor, we've estimated with a few US dairymen that we came to about $8,000 to $9,000 from basically the milk loss, the relief milker that you need to get in, the new milker that needs to get to pace. That pace only needs to get quicker with these rotaries growing to 120 points these days. So it is a broad range. For the low end, it's a little less, but the impact can be really substantial. But it's always good to know when we know that figure that we say, okay, but what can we do then to retain them? Because there's also then an allowance in that sum to keep our staff. Because coming back to the biggest challenge we all raised was retaining and recruiting. So it's also that call to action that also Otter's introduction mentioned. How do we embrace and engage our workforce into the whole exercise? So that will be the next stretch, the final stretch leading into the panel discussion. Let's see if I can get back to work. So how can we do this on your dairy? And we've done this on numerous dairies in the meanwhile. But we always start with one discussion first. I'm missing a slide, but that's what it is. We've launched our DairyWise program, which is designed and tailored around lean management, where we really look at the people side of things. Because many times with robotics and even going on a larger scale, the first ticket that they call us, they say, Kurt, we have an issue with people and we have an issue with finding a workforce. We're almost forced into robotic milking. And then we say, let's sit down first. Where do you want to be 5 to 10 years from now? What's your plan with people? What's your plan with the managerial crew? How can we evolve them, grow them, develop them? How well are they engaged? Are they familiar with the goals you've set as an organization? And are they working towards those goals? And through these DairyWise events, we've learned that the leadership team in many cases has a very strong vision and a good vision. During the boardroom table discussions, they're amongst the highest levels and they could be out and above the industry and big corporations. But what we identify is that on the ground, in the execution, there's a difference. There's not always a vision known. There's not always known like how do we move forward with this operation, and they're running the motions. And what we do with these events is we connect the two together and making sure that we move into the next stretch. Once you embrace lean, you're in it. It doesn't stop anymore. And so do you really want to dig deeper? That's one question that we asked the dairymen before, because it sometimes hurts. And we have to be open. There will be things confronted. And we will all be in the pit after day one, because we've highlighted so much that we think, okay, how do we gonna get out of this? And that's then the next journey we move into. So dig deeper, learn more about your own operation, and even on the best run dairies, there's improvement potential. And those are most of the time the most challenging ones for us. But also it is really intriguing what we still find when digging deeper. The easiest saving is always when it's still on paper. So when you have the privilege to build, design, move ahead with new dairies, consider an extra round of iteration with specialists, with people of the industry to build your next dairy. And it's beautiful to see that almost if we look to the pig industry, we just call big Dutchmen of this world, and we ask for so many pig unit and we get it. And with a dairy farm, it still is tailored to the last inch. And it's beautiful to go through that process. Sometimes it's also intriguing, like, why do we all want to invent a round wheel? Or does it say to us that we still haven't found the right cow environment yet, which is a beautiful challenge for all of us for the future. So on paper, at least a factor 100 compared to once you're in building mode. Spending an extra 1,000K or 10,000K on a $10 million project does make sense. Then we at Lely also reflected upon ourselves. We really had to learn what cows were. When I started with Lely 20 years ago, we were selling technology. We were slowly understanding what cows are and learning what dairymen were doing and people management. that was all in the same person. We dealt with a farmer who was owning his place, managing himself and working for himself. So that was an easy discussion. So once we moved into a larger segment and dealing with organizations, we all had to reinvent ourselves as well, become more lean. But the striking thing that I find that where Lely stands out from all the others in the crowd, and this is the only time I'm going to make a bit of marketing, is that we have a different equation than our competitors. So if you look at the equation and find the formula, in many cases we see cows and the farm as the actual workload, and you need technology and people to cope with that. Meaning that I need more technology and that I need more people to make up for the equation, because we at Lely said the best thing we can do is let the cows work. They're the #1 and the biggest workforce we have on farm. They're actually the value unit. They process feed into beautiful milk and manure as well as a valuable component for our soil management. So let the cows work first. Then in addition, use technology smartly, and that could be robotics, but it can also be mechanized equipment to process and to run your routines that you run, let's say, continuously. Technology is more consistent than people. People are not made to run motions for 8 to 12 hours in a row. We don't have grease joints and grease nipples on the side because after 1 million milkings we're worn out. So actually, when you have all that consistency done by technology, you can really use the people in a smarter, wiser, nicer environment. It's one of the reasons why Lely added enjoyable to our vision. And it was not only about having a sustainable business and a profitable business, but especially we need to engage a future workforce into agriculture, because you are having an issue finding the right people. We have a similar one, because we're all in the same industry. So once we start to look at the farms or the locations, we look at the key processes. So how do we produce milk or beef when it's a beef side? Where is the feed coming from? How does it get to the mouth of the cow? How do we make sure that what we formulated is actually fed? How do we reduce losses throughout the chain? What's happening with manure management? Do we have conflicting flows on site where contamination can happen? Where are the people? And is data and people, are they connected? So from our Lely perspective, we really look at, can we make sure to prevent mistakes by carryovers, because everything is happening on a napkin, the back of a box, a WhatsApp or whatever, and it's not safeguarded in our systems or any system. So looking at all these various flows on site, and that is, here it's very schematic. Once we get on the ground, it's fairly pragmatic. So on the left, picture perfect, we have a feed pusher pushing nothing. So even on our own dairies, we highlight that potential. Farm workers, waiting for animals. What if you could move to the next pen, start your routes already, have a bit of a better pen routine, and then go back to the previous pen and see if all the animals are correctly milked. We make spaghetti diagrams, which is a diagram you see on the right hand side where people move out on site. And then the beautiful ones are always the one that you see at the bottom is, why did that person take that journey? Because 9 out of 10, he was looking for an item costing less than 20 bucks. So learn to see, observe, and a lot of times it is something that we already know and that we've highlighted. And we actually do this going alongside a workforce. So when we start at 4 a.m., then we start at 4 a.m. and we are there. And the beauty of it is we cannot be, let's say, actors. You can only act for 30 seconds and then you're back in your normal motion and normal rhythm. So over the matter of that shift, you build up a relation. Because if we would have been actors, we would all be working in Hollywood and not on a dairy farm. So by going through the motions, we learn, and also we list everything that person in the crowd wishes to change on the dairy, because enormous creativity is already amongst the workforce. So another observation, one second. So looking for less movement, more effective movement, and then many times it's thrown at you when you start to be lean. Yeah, but then I have to work harder. No, it's all about working smarter. And we had one example in our forage factory in the past that a guy was carrying a mower disc for about 15 feet every time he was making one. And we calculated that he did a distance of about 2 miles a day. So we said to him, okay, can we not move it forward? No, I want to stay here. And then at some time, we jokingly said, okay, now you're going to move to the front of the factory. You're going to drop that thing every 15 feet, pick it up and get back again. And then he said, why? I said, because you do it every day. So you sometimes have to elevate the item that you've raised to make the actual improvement. One thing that I also see happening a lot on shift is that there is a disbalance in the working activities. And the sheet maybe is a bit complicated, but what it is on the left side, you see the one-off activities, which are complex, which could be a DA during the day when you have a vet on staff, or doing a proper healthy delivery is already a more frequent, but still a complex, compared with a frequent simple task, which is scraping the beds, keeping the beds clean, hosing the yard. And what you sometimes see is that those complex one-offs are mixed in a shift with simple frequency. And they can only be mixed if the simple frequency is at the end of the shift, not at the beginning. So there is a disproportionate balance in how you manage your shifts and how you plan your shifts. So when setting up new sites and when dealing with investors in emerging markets, we really have a discussion, because sometimes they say, I want to have as little people as possible, but you need to also, let's say, distribute the skill set evenly to make sure that you run your 24/7 business. Then the key thing in a decision-making moment is, okay, what kind of gear are we going to shift this operation in? Are we going to run monthly vet checks? Are we going to run weekly checks, day shifts? The larger it gets, the easier it gets, because it gets the shifts. But what it actually means, if I run something in a shift, I'm really quite lean, because I'm just picking the cows that actually do need to be dealt with now, either insemination, either a hoof trim, either a preg vet check, whatever, or a vaccination. The moment I move to days, I'm already, when I'm running 2 shifts a day, I'm already doubling my amount of animals to deal with at once. When I'm going to week, I'm going ×7. When I'm going to monthly rate, I'm going ×4. But in the meanwhile, I'm also losing a lot of cycles that we have amongst the animal. So anytime you take a cautious decision on what shift you run and what gear you select for your dairy, you know that you also take a decision which has an exposure. As long as you're aware of it, it's a good exposure, but let it be a cautious decision. Then with more growing dairies and more dairies outgrowing their family size, we felt, and we got many times the question, okay, how do I set up this when you have automation in play, when we still have a workforce, when we have the cows, how to make sure to do all the routines. So a simple philosophy that I always mention to a dairyman is, make sure your 3x3 principle is filled. Meaning, every person in the workforce should be able to do 3 tasks, and every activity should be covered by 3 people. This means that even with a small site, I could run a 24/7, 365 operation, because when one calls in sick, I still have the other to run the activities. What we see these days is that many stuff gets outsourced. So for example, on the right-hand column, the breeding is completely outsourced. Make sure that there is also a linking pin on the dairy, and that knowledge that is captured by that person breeding the herd, that it doesn't get lost, because it tells you more, because he's been with that cow, he might have noticed something else that you could deal with. Other stuff, make it a simple whiteboard, as like what Ad said, because it could also be that green is a person who's highly skilled, the red one is still in a learning mode, becoming green, but he needs a counterpart with the knowledge. So this is to secure all activities on site, and that you're able to run them quite effectively. Then the next thing you do is that you at least write down your standard and your SOPs. And it's not a must that this is the starting point of the journey, but it is to safeguard when multiple people are expected to run the same routine, that they equally execute and that the result is comparable. Because you don't want to have a Dairycom 305 overview or a T4C overview showing that you can trace the breeder back in the results with your preg checks. So there's only one best practice for this site, but the best practice has a shelf life, and that's why in the introduction quotes we said we don't change our routines because we're perfect. That's not because we are perfect. No, that is because we know that with seasonal changes, with farm development, with outside influences, there is an impact on our standards. So be agile enough to highlight and to actively start processing your routines again. Looking at it from our perspective, we would challenge our dairymen to look at the way they set up their breeding cycles, their routings that they do with the milking system, their feeding that they do with the feeding robot. How does it tailor with what's currently going on the operation? Then once you went through all the exercises on amongst the cow and at the site, then look at it, where can we do this most logic? And we as Lely, we believe in an in-pen philosophy, that the cow has her environment, that is where she needs to perform. We're not taking around a couple of hours because we want that extra milk that is in that additional rest time, and that we have smart scheduling. So the milking robot is no longer a milking robot. It has evolved into a management robot and a management tool because it sorts the animal. And that's why we at Lely, we also have a thought through philosophy on once an animal is in that managerial area. So it's no longer a separation area. It's a management area because 80% of the animals you've scheduled for, that they can still get milked, because that gives a longer window of opportunity to actually catch that animal for breeding or for preg checks or for hoof trims or anything you've planned with the animal. So plan for your interactions, actually draw a lactation cycle on paper and look at when do we need a human intervention? Can we eliminate that one by technology or not? And how do we want that curve to look like for our heifers, for our mature cows? And can we work towards that curve? And the most consistent dairies in the world, if they make a scatter plot of their production figures over days in milk, you would see that you could actually draft the curve from the scatter plot. When there is less control or there is less consistency in the operation, it is actually a scatter plot and it's all over the place. And you could see fresh cows with just 50 pounds of milk compared with cows peaking at 150 pounds of milk. So that picture tells you so much about the consistency of your dairy. So that's why we now start with, let's pencil your lactation. Let's pencil your preferred outcome of what it should be, because everybody has in his management system that lactation curve available. But let's rewind it, because actually it is the result of the last 12 months of how we've been working. Then, is it all for a new setup? No, this is a German retrofit, which was completely indoors. What we did is we installed the milking robots in the alley where we were bringing the cows to the rotary. The little square in the middle used to be the rotary, which is now a foot bath where they trim complete groups and bring the complete groups to route them through. And in the waiting area, we milk another 60 heifers. So 8,000 cow herd stayed a 1,000 cow herd because we lost a few free stalls in the middle. And in the meanwhile, they need to reduce numbers in the barns because of legislation. But it's a well-run operation over here. When we're planning for new, all the same applies and all the same exercises we go through, like how do you want to manage that operation and what do you expect from your technology provider to support your workforce with the routines, because robots can do magic, but they can break as much as they can do magic. And it's in the end, it is leadership and management that makes the difference. So here a 3,000 cow dairy that we're building in the US with everything under one roof, including the maternity part and far off cows. All run under one roof, mechanically ventilated, one central managerial street where people can work and they can work their pens and by sequence move through the operation. Manure goes one side, feed comes from the other side. Always keep one side open for future developments. Then, what if we go smaller again? So why always go bigger? Local permitting gets more strict. We're under enormous loops of how we work, what we do. The bigger we get, how attractive is the job? If you're working a milking shift, like a feeding job is still a nice one, but even 12 hours in a row driving a mixer wagon, does get kind of the same sequence every day. So can we maintain that consistency? So that's why we looked at a 5,000 cow operation. What if we stay at 699? So under CAFO limits for the US participants, and then have a unit which is highly managerial, which is our maternity unit with high skilled labor 24/7, and then just a 2-person job on a 699 cow dairy off-site. Still looking at all these flows, what's happening under the roof. So where's manure moving? How does that function? What's happening with feeding? How do we do our managerial routes from a person perspective and most effectively? Then all the managerial areas where we've sorted cows, and that's where the high-end profile work starts, and making sure that we provide data at the point of use. So that's how we look at our planning and routines. Then making sure that you follow through on the numbers, the data, the information you receive from the crowd, and to work forward. Make sure that you do a farm walk continuously with the whole team, so not only with the leadership team, but also with the workforce. What do we see from a cow perspective? What do we see from people routines? What can we learn from our technology that we have on site, either being climate, being manure systems, feeding, whatever. And make sure that during that walks that you capture your decisions, and you also are cautious that sometimes we take assumptions, making sure that we can turn them into decisions later on. If you wish to learn more, Lely and Nestle have written a book about lean, which is available through Lely, but even the book that Ab mentions is a beautiful book to read because it's even more pragmatic. And to end the story and to really make sure that that engagement is also sustained, try to also celebrate your achievements, select a long-term KPI to develop your operation, but never lose an opportunity also to have a good party, because that's also what people remember, and it sometimes is paying more dividend than an additional bonus at the end of the month. So to sum up and to summarize, where could it lead to? A more engaged workforce, improved quality of milk, more effective routines, a better working pleasure, and especially from an ownership level, peace of mind. Because when you have the standards there, when somebody leaves, it's easier to replace because you have the picture ready to introduce that person into the group. So by having said that, I hope that everybody enjoyed it, and that we can now stand out from the crowd again because we're better in control of what we actually do. And when you would have the opportunity to build your next dairy, look at it once from another perspective. Why would I build to milk instead of having the ability to build to manage? Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. I think we should already raise our hands as a kind of applause to thank Kurt for his presentation.
Thank you.
Wow, there you go. As we always do, we'd like to invite some attendees to become the panelist. Let me see. So I'm just going to name a couple of your names. I'm just going to lower your hands again. Let me see. Andrew Brewer. I'm going to invite you to become a panelist as, let me see, Martijn Damstev from Denmark. I'm going to promote you to be a panelist as well. And let me see, Dr. Kaka Nadiratsa from Georgia as well. Could you all turn on your camera, and Kurt, could you stop sharing your screen?
I will. The floor is yours.
Hi there. So maybe it's a good idea if you can all first shortly introduce yourself by saying your name, your occupation, and where you're from. Maybe Andrew, you start.
Yes, hi there. I'm Andrew Brewer. I'm a grass-based dairy farmer from the southwest of the UK.
Thank you, Andrew. Martijn?
I have a dairy farm together with my wife in Denmark with 800 cows.
Thank you, thank you. Dr. Karga? Can you unmute yourself? I think your microphone is still off. No. Me. Yes. Oh. Or maybe you do not prefer to be part of this discussion. That's also fine, of course. Maybe Koer, do you have a question for these gentlemen?
I wish to learn, like, how do you look to the next 5 years, and would you have a plan in place on the dairy? Maybe Andrew first.
Yes, yeah, we have done for probably 20 years a 5-year plan. And I've learned that you have to keep it rolling, because if you have a 5-year plan, you usually achieve it by 3.
Okay. Martijn, your perspective?
Yeah, we have a plan for the next 5 years. We want to increase in more cows. Special to, how I can say it, to make it easier with the employers. I can also see when we have more employers, it's easier to work in systems. And also easier to replace people when there come new people. Or easier to work with the SOPs, the protocols. And to earn more money.
That's hopefully a nice result indeed out of that exercise. So back to Andrew, like you're rolling 5 and you said I've accomplished it in 3. So who do you use at the front end to challenge then the goals for the 5-year plan?
My wife and I are very much involved in the business. We always have had an independent consultant, probably the referee. But it's actually, we're fairly driven and have a focus of where we want to go. And we work under the 3W principles of where do we want to be, where are we now, and what have we got to do to get where we want to be.
And then who else would you invite into those conversations?
Pretty much, we are part of active members of discussion groups and have been for 20 odd years, and we have a trusted sort of group of very close friends that we all bounce ideas off each other.
And to you, Martijn, like who do you involve in your planning? Is it the kitchen table with your wife, or together with the bank or independent advisors?
Now we have, of course, my wife, but we have also 2 extra people for making a strategy plan, because we see the dairy is changing also in the world, and especially when you grow up to more cows, you must also see all the things. As a farmer, you see not everything, and that is a good help when we have extra people from extern who help us, especially when we talk about employers. You can see we start with no employers, and now we have 11. It changed a lot for me as farmer, and that you cannot learn by yourself, that you need also the help. And that is the success where you want to grow, that it is working with the employees.
So where are your employees sourced from, Martijn?
They're coming from Romania.
Okay.
And Denmark.
Okay, so a nice mix of local labor as well.
Yes.
Andrew, what labor force are you running?
So we have 5 employees. Through the years, we've employed a lot of New Zealanders on their travels, but actually at the moment we actually have a full team of UK-based local staff. So yeah, it's quite unusual actually today.
Okay. So how is that working out with having a more local crew these days? Do you see that is easier to develop, or to the contrary?
Probably the contrary. We've got a very young team at the moment, so yeah, we're very much developing. So we're spending a lot of time training and developing, and we do actually sort of we put in a budget as a percentage of their salaries into training each year.
Okay. Yvonne, I understand that Mr. Kaka has a question. He dropped a note in the panel box, but he's still muted. So maybe we can type the question for the audience.
Sure.
Martijn, how much time do you spend on educating the people? Like, what's your training routine with people coming and going? And is it a role you have for yourself, or is it externals, or the ones that are leading the team?
Yeah, we have leaders on every department, and they train the new people. It's for me the biggest job to follow up if they follow the SOPs for the leaders. But the leaders train the new people. So that is also nice.
So you said you have departments. Which departments have you highlighted for your dairy?
Now we milk on 2 locations. Dus we have 2 leaders for milking. We have a leader for feeding, and a leader for calves, and a leader for the fields. And I am self-standing for the cows and for the people.
Okay. And then your wife has another duty in the business, or she has an outside work job?
My wife is doing the office work and helping in the stables. And take care about the family.
Like yourself, probably.
Yeah. And then, one time a week we have a meeting with all the employees. Special that they know what we want, that they know what what the goals are, and we follow up the goals every week. And one time a month we have a bigger meeting with the leaders. Then they have to come self with the key figures to see if they follow up the keys of the goals.
And is that like a stand-up session, or is it a sit-down session? How have you organized that through the dairies?
We're sitting on one location then. There's all the people come to one location. Then we take a cup of coffee. And then I say what's happened the last week. And how much milk we make, about somatic cell count in the milk. How it's going with the cows, especially what is the plan for the next week. That they know what's happened. So that they also know when we make a new grass silo next week, that they also know when, we have to help to close the silo. Not that they write, no, this evening we have to close the silo. They know it a few days before.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like any things that you have on an action plan are being discussed as well, or how do you start new improvements?
Yeah, we have goals, and every month, and I write the goal of the results of the goals on the whiteboard. And when the goals are not good enough, or when we have the results are not good enough, then we make together a plan. How can we change it that we come on the goals? We try to talk a lot with the people, that they also have the feeling that they have the responsibility, and they can come with input.
Okay, thank you. So still the question of Mr. Nadirats is outstanding. I'm not fully understanding when I read it. So maybe to figure out then, Andrew, what is more or less, what are the subjects in your 5-year plan? And how do you stay in control of, let's say, everything that's happening around yourself in that stretch of 3 to 5 years to realize it?
Yeah, it's varying. It's a very strategic sort of view on the 5-year plan. It's separate really from annual planning of the herd and other opportunities. It's looking at the bigger picture type things really. like Martijn, we would have weekly meetings. It used to be daily meetings in our kitchen. Everybody would come for breakfast, but we've actually just stepped away from that just at the moment. But it's daily meetings, ongoing, seeing what's going on. Use of a year planner, because we're block calving. We can book 12 months ahead. Everything's planned. That they can look at the calendar and they know that the animals need worming, or the vet is coming on a certain day, and that can be 12 months ahead. So it gives a lot of certainty to the team.
Okay. It gives you the
guys.
time to plan ahead. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, all of you. I'm just dropping in like this, I'm sorry. But it's about time. And I think it's nice to have one final question for both Andrew and Martijn. If you look at lean and you look at your own procedures, what do you think, or maybe even Koert can answer this, what do you think lean could add, or maybe Koert can answer, could add to your current procedures? Koert, if you listen to Andrew's and Martijn's answers, what do you think how could lean benefit both of them?
What I've heard so far is already the whiteboard, so the visual management, talking about the goals, engaging the workforce in the goals. So actually I'm hearing a lot of good stuff already. So for me, it would be tough to say what exactly for this particular dairy could be the next phase. And like Andrew already said, I'm thinking strategic. I plan 12 months ahead. That's a beauty in planning. One question I would have then is, okay, how would you deal with the milk produced, and are you definite that milk is being purchased, and how's your milk contract running alongside?
We're very fortunate that with an Arla contract that they'll take all our milk. So at the moment, so we're pretty secure with our milk contract. Being part of a co-op is being a very strong business. The UK especially has seen a lot of upset in the last few months, and the strength and benefit of being within a co-op has proven that again.
And listening to Martijn, I think really nice that everything is divided into the teams and the sub teams. So for me, it would be like, how have you envisioned to grow the workforce, and will that jump forward in cows that you mentioned be on the 2 sites, or will it even mean that you would open up a 3rd site, and what would be the impact?
A good question. Well, we go not on 3rd side.
Okay.
There's only what we are thinking. The world is changing quicker, as that we can see here, and that is the biggest focus for us now, to grow with everybody. And when you look about the future, also what I heard last week, the old farmers, older than 60 years, when they have not the next generation ready, then they have to make a plan how they close the farms.
Is that now the Danish scenario?
Yes.
Oof.
Dus dat is last week what I heard, and I think there's a lot of things happens in the dairy, and I think it's now happened in Denmark, but maybe it's coming on more places, especially for the family farms.
I would agree.
Yep. Okay, thank you for those beautiful answers.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's time to give all these gentlemen, a great applause by raising your hand, because they were willing to turn on their cameras. And a very, very big round of applause for our presenter of today, Koert van Lenteren. There's still some questions that remain unanswered, and I'm certain that Koert can answer those either through email or his contact. Just let me know, and I will bring you guys in contact with each other. Then I would now like to give the word to our president, Mr. Ad van Velde, who will tell you a little bit about our next webinar.
Our next webinar, you can hear me? It's okay, Yvonne?
Yes, I can hear you. Yep.
Yeah. Our next webinar, actually it is a workshop, is one that is covering something that is on everybody's mind, especially on the minds of our business partners, the supplying industry. In times of COVID-19 and social distancing, communication between people is put to the test. How does the supplying industry communicate with our dairy farmers in the future? And while some farmers are happy because they finally have time to tackle some overdue maintenance and complete so many projects, industry representatives wonder how they get in touch with customers when they cannot actually visit them. The industry suddenly becomes very creative. Webinars, online meetings are popping up like mushrooms. As a farmer, we could watch 5 to 10 webinars on milk production and marketing every day. But are Skype, Zoom, others really the new standards in communication? What would be the best mix of communication for us as farmers? How, in what way do we receive the right amount and the most relevant information to develop our farm as a farmer and as an entrepreneur? During our upcoming GDF event, my dear friend, we need to talk. We will discuss together, but also in breakout rooms where we think the line of communication and the contact should go to. What about education? What about training? P&R, trade fairs? What about direct contact? 30, 40 years ago, we had this old-fashioned phone and the fountain pen. What will be the future? That's what we would like to find out with our GDF farmers and GDF business partners. A GDF event exclusive for our farmers and business partners. They will receive more information and the registration link within a couple of days. Next slide, please. I would like to thank everyone for attending this GDF webinar. Finally, pay attention to our website and follow GDF on social media. Then you will be kept informed of all our events. Plus, everyone can sign up for our weekly updates. And to dairy farmers among you who are not yet members of GDF, please contact us. Thanks again. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, the panel members. Take care, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll meet again at July 7th. Thank you.